So we're going to be looking now into the 12th session here on evangelism and Christian apologetics. Specifically, we're essentially examining the Bible's self-proclaimed status of actually delivering instances of fulfilled prophecy. This is one of those areas that pops up perennially in cultural discussion around the trustworthiness of the Bible itself. The question is essentially, does the Bible really offer to us genuine predictions that become fulfilled in time and in history? And we're going to be presenting the case in this session that is indeed true. I want to offer to you an argument at the start of this session that will basically frame most of the material that we're going to be visiting today. So, let's begin by examining the work of scholar and author Nassim Taleb. In his best-selling book, The Black Swan, writer Nassim Taleb penned a groundbreaking thesis. Engrossingly authored, the volume chronicles the unexpected impact of highly improbable events. The book opens with a brief summary of the theory, describing the first ever sighting of a black swan, noting that no one could have suspected or predicted that such an animal even existed. Quote, "The sighting of the first black swan," writes Taleb, "illustrates a severe limitation to our knowledge. One single observation can invalidate a general statement derived from millions of white swans." Taleb thus surmises, our inability to predict a black swan implies our inability to predict the course of history. And today, Taleb's concept sits well alongside other undirected reality models, such as the theory of evolution. So we understand the backstory here. Essentially, the idea that we had never seen a black swan throughout most of Western history until old world naturalists visited the shores of Australia. Lo and behold, a black swan swims by, and science essentially changed. Ornithology had changed ever since. But it's important to understand here that Nassim Taleb sees something broader about this story, because the kind of statements about the black swan that we find dotting the books of Western history are indicative of a line of thought that is now shown to be falsified. For example, I highlight the statements delivered once by Julian, the Roman historian, who said that an honest woman is about as difficult to find as a black swan. So, essentially, the idea there, of course, is that a black swan doesn't exist, therefore neither does an honest woman. But then, of course, as I indicated, old world naturalists visited the shores of Australia, and suddenly this statement was shown to be fallacious for unexpected reasons. And essentially, if we cannot predict these sorts of outliers, then how can the probability sciences be employed to predict the outcomes of history? This is essentially the basis, the germ, if you will, of Taleb's thesis. The question here is Taleb's chance view of history correct? Was the outcome of our last presidential election, for example, just a freak black swan? Or might we discover other hidden explanations to account for the strange appearances of these sorts of unexpected occurrences? Well, in the eyes of most atheists today, the question is already settled. There is no ultimate direction to which any single historical event may aspire. In the eyes of most Christians, however, Taleb is simply mistaken. The game is fixed, the outcome rigged, the end already determined. And so then how do we go about deciding today who is right? Is Taleb's thesis really the only sensible option here? Or, to borrow his own words, could a, quote, single observation rather serve to invalidate his own supremely winsome thinking? Well, normally atheists hold that Christian beliefs, such as divine providence, depend too naively upon ideas which cannot themselves be proven. I mean, can any of us prove the Trinity? No. But could the opposite in this case actually wind up being more accurate? That a provident God has somehow predetermined human history? Well, some time ago, I actually confronted this set of issues personally. I was speaking with an atheist friend on the subject of Bible prophecy. And I'd only just begun to explain that the Bible predicts the future when my friend suddenly objected by declaring, "But ancient prophecies are nonsense." While recognizing his obvious conviction on the matter, I sought him for greater clarity. I asked him to explain to me precisely what it was that he meant. And within a few moments, it became abundantly obvious to me what my doubt-filled companion had been attempting to convey. You see, on his view, all Bible prophecies are inherently uncertain. That is, their unparticular predictions can be joined to almost anything. Like the contents of a fortune cookie, their words are pan-applicable and can thus be easily adapted to fit the remotest situation. So in other words, the Bible is what you want it to be. And so I therefore nodded my head as I listened to my friend's reply. I communicated my empathy regarding his rather incredulous views. And yet I was also deeply aware of several significant philosophical problems which lay at the very root of his all too familiar objection. The issues, in fact, were quite similar to those I'd previously encountered as I'd familiarized myself with the work of writer Nassim Taleb. And in fact, they were part and parcel to the very same problems which are invoked by the grand thematic predictions of the Black Swan theory. And so turning to this popular book, I thus addressed my friend's complaint. I compared it with Taleb's own questionable description of his views. For in the inside dust jacket of the volume, the best-selling author defines the concept as follows. Give it a listen. Quote, "A black swan is a highly improbable event with three principal characteristics. Number one, it is unpredictable. Number two, it carries a massive impact. And number three, after the fact, we concoct an explanation that makes it appear less random. After the fact, we concoct an explanation that makes it appear less random." And so, due therefore to his own highly suspicious wording, Taleb's favored theory here is made impossible to question. Do you see that? Because the moment that we offer God as an alternative to the random, that is the random history, we've already in a sense proven that Taleb is correct. This is kind of strange, right? I mean, if Taleb says to you, my theory is that history is random, and the second prediction of my theory is that you're going to question my theory, to which point you say, well, what if God, aha, my theory is right. This is a bit like claiming that watermelons are really blue on the inside until the precise moment that you cut the skin, see? Such a theory is patently unfalsifiable, which is really a problem. Which ultimately means, by the way, that you cannot test it, right? You can't test an unfalsifiable theory. And so I therefore urge my friend to see that we really needed to restate his argument here. We needed to distill his basic premise prior to comparing it with the pages of Scripture. Because the only sure way to know if the Bible prophecies are truly indeterminate is to simply ask point blank, what do the prophecies actually claim? Now, provided we discover in the pages of the Bible that any narrow predictions are scarce, then my friend would be correct and Bible prophecy would be reduced to nonsense. But as it turns out, interestingly enough, the opposite appears to be true. Extremely specific predictions appear which bring these sorts of arguments to task. Now, perhaps the most noteworthy of these comes from the mind of a pagan king. The story is found in the ancient and mysterious biblical book of Daniel. And the startling prediction carries a marvelous fulfillment, one which, if true, would have a devastating impact on Taleb's Black Swan theory. The text records the intriguing story which opens with a troubled king sweating in his bed. And as he tosses and turns, his dreams deeply disturb him, causing his mind to become filled with unrest. Accordingly, the story tells us that the king became gravely frightened. The text reads, quote, "His spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. He therefore commanded that his royal astrologers be summoned in order that they might come and interpret to him his dreams." The king demanded, "If you make the dream known to me and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honors. If you do not make the dream known to me and its interpretation." My goodness. Well, the astrologers were, of course, brought to utter silence. None, in fact, were able to show to the king his dreams. For he had enjoined unto them an impossible task of perfectly reciting the dream apart from his first-hand telling of it. No one was therefore courageous enough to venture a guess. I mean, would you? For how could anyone know for certain what the king had dreamed? Only one man, in fact, dared to offer an explanation. And his answer, if authentic, proves that history is indeed divinely directed. But surely you see the problem, my friend replied, missing the point. These kinds of ambiguous predictions can be understood as referring to almost anything, right? I mean, Nostradamus? Sadly, this was merely, unfortunately, a second helping of Taleb's argument, a problem which caused the entire point to be cast into endless questioning. For returning to the book, the eminent author writes, quote, as I formulated my ideas on the perception of random events, I developed the governing impression that our minds are wonderful explanation machines, capable of making sense out of almost anything, end quote. For this reason, I advised my friend to behave himself more cautiously. I pleaded with him to resist the temptation to become so easily duped, because for this was really none other than the very same fallacy I'd earlier warned him of. Remember? The watermelon mysteriously turns red the precise moment that you cut it. So the superstitious Christian reader becomes the proof of the skeptic's argument. He's accused of playing jazz, of merely improvising with the story. Like a man reading a Rorschach inkblot, he's simply seeing what he wants to. The problem is, theories that cannot be falsified are only shaky at best. And so I therefore advocated for a shift in our broader approach here. I encouraged my friend to adopt a renewed willingness to hear these sorts of stories out. For to form a comparison, really no Christian today would seriously base an argument for the authenticity of Bible prophecy solely upon its prediction that some people will reject it. Such reasoning is clearly circular, not to mention simplistic. For the very same reason, we ought to reject the skeptic's argument. Instead, we should make it our aim to discover truth wherever it lies, even if the source of that truth is the Bible, which in this case, it is. And so returning then to our story, our king here is Nebuchadnezzar. The year here is 604 BC. History shows us that Nebuchadnezzar had been utterly successful in ushering the Neo-Babylonian Empire to its worldwide ascendancy. And the whole of the civilized world now lay prostrate at his feet. Not a single solitary challenger was anywhere to be found. And it was then that out of nowhere the king grew childishly frightened and commanded that his subjects be forced to interpret to him his dreams. In turn, all who heard the king despaired before him but one. A young Jewish lad named Daniel quietly enters the plot. He confidently declared, quote, I shall show the king the interpretation, and proceeded to reveal to the king all that was in his heart. To you, O king, came thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will be. The boy then went on to show the exact details of the dream, along with their clear, unambiguous, and plain meaning. Quote, Your Majesty looked, and there before you stood a statue. The young boy accurately described his brazen human form. The sculpture in this case was an effigy to the history of the Western civilization spanning from the time of Babylon clear to Jesus' day. The head was made of gold, and the chest and arms of silver, while the torso was molded from a single slab of bronze. Finally, the legs were fashioned from a piece of hefty iron with feet that formed a mixture of iron and clay. While you were watching, the boy declared, a rock was cut, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay. Instantly, the idol burst into powder, and a curious wind blew the remaining fragments away. Yet the stone that remained, which had been cast by God, became a great and mighty mountain which filled the whole earth. And to this day, the predictive character of the dream is so undeniable that even some secular historians have wondered at its powerfully accurate claims. According to the text here, the statue was a symbol featuring 4 successive kingdoms which would wind up ruling over the whole earth. The first kingdom was Babylon, which was symbolized by gold, and spoke of the tremendous wealth of her lauded capital city. Here, explorer and historian Francis H. Buzzacott described it as, quote, a golden kingdom of a golden age. And the statement doubtless spoke of Nebuchadnezzar's taking of Jerusalem, a move which brought Babylon unparalleled fame. Now, why had that brought him such fame and gold and wealth? Well, incidentally, if you do your homework in the stories of the kings of Israel, look in your Bibles in 1 Kings, you discover that King Solomon, who was the son of David, had amassed more gold than any king prior to him. So therefore, any empire which managed to take over the city of Jerusalem would therefore be free to plunder Solomon's coffers, if you will. And that would essentially make that kingdom the richest and wealthiest kingdom on the face of the earth, which is exactly what Babylon became. It was indeed, as Francis H. Bozicott mentions, a golden kingdom of a golden age. Next came the Medo-Persian Empire, symbolized by the pair of silver arms. Now, silver was the sign of this kingdom's power, which was founded on its system of universal taxation. Darius the Great, the kingdom's third ruler, introduced the system of coinage, increasing her strength. And it was then that the daric emerged as its primary legal tender, a silver coin which became the source of Persia's notable fame. Why only silver? Well, you see, in this case, the Darius the Great, who was the third ruler in the Medo-Persian Empire, essentially constrains the minting of gold darics to the actual capital city itself. All the rest of the provinces got silver, and so therefore this caused the entire Medo-Persian Empire to overflow with silver, and this system of universal taxation is still a staple in modern Western culture to this day. Following the fall of Persia, the Greek Empire rose, led by military genius Alexander the Great. Incidentally, the kingdom of Greece was symbolized in the text by bronze, which denoted her dauntless soldierly strength. Now, what's interesting here is that according to period experts, her troops were clad, listen, with breastplates of bronze, helmets of bronze, and shields and swords of bronze. This is the third time that the Bible has pegged it right. So by these unique weapons, Greece gained power and control over the Neo-Babylonian Empire and fulfilled Bible prophecy for a third time, ensuing the Third Age. What are the chances that you'd get it right this many times in a row? What are the chances that a world empire would stay in the case of three power transitions, three massive geopolitical toss-ups? I think we're seeing that this is an extraordinary turn of events. Last of all, the mighty Roman Empire arose, inaugurating the fourth and final phase. Noted secular historian Edward Gibbon made this remarkable mention of Rome's iron power. Listen to this. Quote, "The arms of the Republic, sometimes vanquished in battle, always victorious in war, advanced with paid steps to the Euphrates. And the images of gold or silver or bronze that might serve to represent the nations and their kings were successively broken by the iron monarchy of Rome." And so thus, Rome fulfills Bible prophecy for the fourth time in a row with weapons of iron which fueled her bloody campaigns. Incidentally, the short Roman iron gladius, which was Rome's saber of choice, was attended by a breastplate which was forged from the very same. Hence, the case for biblical prophecy here powerfully confronts Taleb's views and lays before the skeptic a formidable point, and that is this: that random universe or random history models, such as the black swan theory, really cannot account for what the Bible predictively claims here. Sadly, my companion in this case chose to cut short our talk. It seemed he was unable to squarely face the point here. For imagine that the laws of probability, that is, by chance alone, had somehow predetermined Daniel's account of Babylon's fate. This is really kind of a strange tack to take. Unfortunately, my friend had only succeeded in one thing, namely in formulating an incoherent case. For how could the future be random, as he claimed it was, and yet fully predetermined at the same time? How does that work? If predetermining circumstances had made it such that Daniel's predictions became fulfilled, then the future wasn't random. On the other hand, if it was random, why did the predictions appear to become fulfilled as they did? How does that work? And so in conclusion, I think we'll just go ahead and return to Taleb's argument, which, though logically flawed, nevertheless remains consistent. Because if the future is truly indeterminate, as he claimed it was, it would therefore follow that all predictive science is nothing but a sham. Forget about your stockbroker. He's an idiot. Thus, the probability calculus, according to Taleb, is just a fraud, a high-level hoodwink, mystic prayer in a cheap tuxedo, no more to be taken seriously than astrology. Perhaps given such a problem, skeptics could begin to consider whether or not the Bible's statements regarding its own predictive claims might actually, at least in this case, be correct. And so, really, there's so much that we could have gone into here to unfold the Bible's unique ability to predict human history. But just on the basis of this single chapter, incidentally, all this material was taken from Daniel chapter 2, we can see that the Bible seems to be predicting the future accurately. To somehow accurately predict a series of 4 geopolitical shakeups with all their political intrigues and the complex historical events that had to take place in order for all of these things to become fulfilled to the letter, as they indeed were, we're looking at something that is extraordinarily unlikely if the Bible is just a humanly devised book.